Hi, everyone. Welcome to SmartCT Institute Japan's webinar series called Global Perspectives on Smart Cities. I'm Tak Nagumo, Executive Director of SmartCT Institute Japan, your host today. So today we have a distinguished speaker from the Philippines. Let's invite our distinguished speakers. Ms. Kris Libunao, Executive Director and Chief Sustainability Officer of SmartCT. So Kris, please come in. Hi.
Hello, Tak. Good afternoon.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me and for this initiative's global perspective, which I believe is really needed in terms of the smart city development in the world currently.
Thank you very much. And today your title is the need for developing nations model of smart cities, best practices, opportunities, and challenges, which sounds very interesting. Right.
Thank you.
Kris, before I hand it over to you, just a housekeeping message to the audiences. So we would like to encourage audiences to send us questions or comments or encouraging message to Kris via the chat box. But when you write messages, please choose all panelists and the participants from the pull-down menu. That way we can share all the writings with the participants, okay? All right, so without further ado, Kris, your show time.
Thanks, Tak. So again, hi everyone. It's nice to be here with you all. So before we get all started, just again, a shout out to Tak, to Kudo, to the SCI-Japan team for organizing this event. Again, I am Kris Libunao, and I am coming in here with the lens from data stewardship, from urban planning, project management, and more than a decade of policy consultancies. So currently, as mentioned by Tak earlier, I am the Executive Director and Chief Sustainability Officer of SmartCT. So about SmartCT, at SmartCT, we want to move the conversation of smart cities, of digital transformation, away from solely being about technology, about application development, towards one which is more open, more holistic, and people-centric. So how do we do this and what do we offer? We do this through our sustainable digital transformation approach. So what we offer is research, applied research, solution design and development, and advisory services. In this 30-minute presentation, I will first discuss a quick overview about smart cities. Then we will then tackle opportunities and challenges of smart city applications in the Philippines. Afterwards, we will conclude for the way forward and a few reminders on developing smart sustainable cities in developing countries. So this morning, the first thing I did was to check my phone. And I am pretty confident that if I ask Tak, if I ask Kudo, they would say, they did the same. So why do we do this? Because probably we feel left out of what is happening in the world, or perhaps to communicate with our loved ones. Well, if we really think about it, the short answer is that our smartphones are the windows to our lives, really. With more than 10 sensors in one smartphone, it is basically the world in our pocket. So it collects data morning and night. Why is this important? Why is smartphones important for smart cities? Because the development of this communication technology, including smartphones, plays a great role in the evolution of smart cities. So here you would see in a nutshell, when the local area network was developed or invented in the 1960s, the digital cities emerged. Then afterwards, the digital cities gradually become intelligent cities. When we have what? When we have the global internet in the 1980s. And currently, what do we have now? Now we have Wi-Fi. We also have our smartphones. So in the late 1990s and around like 2000, that's where the local governments and that's where the technology companies really start using smart city concepts. So where am I getting at? Why did I start with this history of smart cities? What I want to say here is that smart city as a concept is not really new. It has been around for ages, and there have been initiatives since 1960s that we just have to continue to improve on. Another thing that I want to emphasize is that smart cities should be and are not different with other city paradigms. What are these paradigms? Resilient cities, age-friendly cities, livable cities, sustainable cities. What I want to say is that we cannot really separate smart cities from these particular paradigms. Why? It's like just we can't separate, technology and digital transformation from our daily lives, isn't it? So here, in fact, in our research, which is done in around, I believe it was November 2020, we found out that even if there is no universal definition in terms of smart cities, and even if we think that some people think that smart cities are separate from other city initiatives like resilient cities and such, they are really not if you look into it. The main goals are common to all the schools of thought. So what are these main goals? We aim to enhance the citizens' quality of life. We want to provide high quality service. We want to have a higher level of social participation. We want to have a data-driven policymaking or informed decision-making. And we want to push for innovative and technology use. So, do you still think that smart cities are different from resilient cities, sustainable cities, and such? Well, I hope not, okay? So now we move on to the next part, wherein I will discuss about the smart cities in the Philippine context. So in context, the Philippines is an archipelagic country covering 300,000 square kilometers inland with a population of 100 million, more than 111 million population. So if you look into it, Japan is 26% larger than the Philippines. So the Philippines is also one of the most rapidly urbanizing countries in Asia, with an annual growth rate of 2.26%. So here are the other trends that's happening in the Philippines. You would see the image here. This image shows that there is a fast increase in terms of build-up or gray areas from the 1989 to 2012. So there's also a decrease in natural and agricultural land cover at the peripheries. So another trend to be noted is that by 2050, 56% of the population will live in cities or urban areas. So here, you can see the layers of local authority in the Philippines. So generally, the local governments or the cities are decentralized. So currently, 60%, we have to note that 60% of the population still lives in around 1,500 municipalities, which is mostly outside the Metro Manila area. So here you would see President Duterte during the 2017 event in Clark City. So in this speech, the president argues that Metro Manila's infrastructure is quite hopeless and beyond repair on improvement, calling instead for a decentralization and development on the countryside outside Metro Manila. And I agree with this. My co-founder and I are from small towns in the Philippines. Actually, I spent most of my life in a town which is known for its coffee, which is Batangas. And my co-founder, Ben, he grew up in a town which is proud of its chilies. That's why in SmartCT, our organization, we really want to focus on communities beyond Metro Manila as possible. We want to give them a megaphone or perhaps like a voice or pass the baton, so to speak, to those smaller communities and underrepresented voices in smart development. And we really believe that there's a lot of potential and untapped opportunities in the countryside. So to do this, we do not want to reinvent the wheel. So what we did is we started looking for existing smart city projects in the Philippines to piggyback on. So here are a few smart city projects that we found. First in Manila, in partnership with several local government elsewhere as well, like Singapore, US, and such. There's one in Makati as well. There's one in Clark, in Baguio. In Baguio, I believe they partnered with Cisco in creating their smart city center, communication center. Then they do have in Cebu as well as Cebu is one of the ASEAN Smart City Network pilot projects wherein they're really pushing for bus rapid transits. And of course, others. So there are Kawayan City, Iloilo, Pasig, Davao, Iriga, and other digital transformation initiatives. Then we look at the national level as well. So on the national level, there are a few initiatives too. So this is the Digital Cities initiatives of Department of Information and Communication Technology. So through partnership with different associations, Lichu property consultants and such, they want to sustain the rapid growth of information technology and business process management systems in the countryside by developing IT centers. So another national initiative in terms of smart cities in the Philippines is the 2013 Smarter Philippines initiatives by the Department of Science and Technology. So on to our third part, wherein the opportunities and challenges, I will talk about the findings in our research. So first, let's talk about the opportunities that we have in the Philippines. First, Filipinos are, not surprisingly, on average, is as digitally savvy as their regional counterparts. Filipinos connect to the internet more through mobile broadband services compared to more stable fixed broadband services. So the digital adoption really in the Philippines is currently high. Next opportunity that we have is that the Department of Science and Technology just released its Smart City framework in terms of research. So it has two major components, which is the Smarter Provinces and City for urban development, and the other component is the Smarter Countryside, which is for rural development. Another opportunity that we have currently is the full devolution. So if before, decentralization of cities and local governments is only by law, through the recent ruling, I believe this 2021, Mandana's ruling, the local governments will have the fiscal power on certain aspects as well. So we can look at this implementation of this Mandana's ruling, not just a transfer of resources, but of course an opportunity in terms of strengthening the decentralization and improving the social service delivery in the Philippines. So again, the opportunities earlier are digital, the digital adoption, then the Smart City National Framework, and of course, the decentralization with fiscal autonomy as well. So let's talk about the challenges. So in terms of the challenges, here are our findings. So the first challenge, I believe most, if not all of the Smart City initiatives in different countries experience this, is that the past and current Smart City initiatives in the Philippines are too technology-centered. So wherein most, if not all, Smart City development is all about apps, it's all about technology centers. So studying the Smart City projects in the Philippines, most, if not all, does not really involve urban planning. It does not really involve data-driven practices, or probably they come as an afterthought. So they usually start by acquiring apps, and seemingly it starts and stops in terms of acquiring apps. So next challenge that we see in the Philippines is that like elsewhere globally, the Philippines Smart City development focuses on the rich and already developed communities. So interestingly enough, as I mentioned earlier, the Smarter Philippines or Smart City initiatives enters the Philippines in 2013 through the Smarter Philippines program of the DOST. But during our research, still we cannot really find any record in terms of the data documenting the updates on the same. So there is no sharing among the local government units. There's no best practices really for other local government units or cities to follow. So next would be, there's a weak public oversight. So with this, because on the social aspect, there is no inclusion of human rights and sustainable development aspects in the Smart City programs and projects. So why is this important? If you're coming from the business sector, why is this important on the business perspective? On the business aspect, with no oversight and weak public oversight, any Smart City project can be discontinued or put on halt due to political or any other particular reasons. So next challenge that we have is that we have a data problem in the Philippines. So before COVID-19, in terms of city development, there were already plans, there are a lot of projects that already collect data sets from the cities. But because of COVID-19, we now have a lot of apps. But honestly, we really don't know where the data goes. So imagine if you're a developer, or imagine if you're like a city official and you want to develop like an initiative on what do you call this? On perhaps you want to reduce emissions, but you don't know where the biggest, energy users are. You don't know how many cars are on the road. You don't know how many waste are produced every year. And even if you can set a goal for reducing emissions, you have no way in terms of measuring progress against the same. So this is really a situation that far too many urban planners and even private companies, policymakers, and city officials experience every day in the Philippines. So how does Smart City, or we as an organization, tackle these problems? So in Smart City, we tackle these problems in a way that is not, I guess, as sexy as selling software, or not as sexy as selling apps. So our first approach really is the countryside development. So unlike developed countries and high-income countries, we really believe in Smart City, that we cannot grasp AI, we cannot grasp IoT, big data, if our stomach is aching from hunger, really. So, but I am exaggerating here to make a point. A Smart City should be underpinned with basic service provision. So reliable basic service provision for all should be at the base of any smart city transformation. So here you would see we partnered with a small municipality in the Philippines to pilot our project. So we're really pushing for smart open source Arteche, which is Arteche is a municipality in the Philippines, in order to create a replicable model of smart city. So our next approach is open source and interoperability. What we've noticed in the government is that they are burdened by legacy systems that really do not talk to each other. So they do not share the data and all. And yet, currently, they still continue to add more systems, to add more apps on top of their legacy systems. So what we do in Smart City is that we partner with local governments and help them assess. We create an online and offline assessment of their current systems and data and craft a strategy with them in order to ensure that there's an information system integration on the ground. So our next approach is the open data in the local level. So we are evangelizing open data in cities and municipalities in the local government. So freedom of information is nice. It's nice to request an information from the government and wait for them to reply. But we really believe that open data is great. So the COVID-19 pandemic made us also realize that the cities and the municipalities are the frontliners of the disasters of any particular events. And yet, in the Philippines, the data sets, and even in other developing countries, the data sets that we have cannot be translated to city-level data. So what the other people doesn't realize as well is that without open, without updated, without well-managed data, real smart city models and projects cannot be developed, and it cannot be sustained as well. So what we are really pushing is that here you would see we were able to help one of the local governments to pass the first city level executive order in terms of open data policy, which ensures that the data sets should be machine readable and should be open by default. Next that we do is the data inventory and collaborative local data portal. So again, if you check the national data portal currently in the Philippines, the figures on if you want to look for the figures on transportation, the figure for land use, the figures from other base data, they are hardly on the city level or local government level. So this particular picture here shows our event that we held together with more than 140 cities and municipalities in the Philippines, wherein we confirmed that most local governments in the Philippines do not have digitalized data sets to put into a ready-made portal. So even if like an existing system is there already, and you go to the city level and you sell your system, there's no digitalized data sets that they can put in that particular portal. That is why we partner with local government units in the Philippines to perform their data inventory and digitalize their data sets as well. So last but not the least is our data literacy and open data fellowships. So of course, we really believe that we cannot build a portal, publish data sets and expect that people will use it and people will just come. So for us, the long-term strategy is really boosting digital and data literacy of the people. So we offer training even on the private sector, on the organization level and on the individuals as well. So here we are about to launch our first Open Data Fellowship this September with 16 fellows in the first cohort. So we really believe that data literacy is going beyond data science, that data literacy skill is for everyone. It is not a mathematics skills, it is beyond a science skills. We really believe that data literacy is a life skill in the digital era. So to wrap everything up, first, we cannot separate smart cities from other city initiatives like resilient cities, relivable cities, sustainable cities, digital cities, and all. Just like we can't separate technology and digital transformation from our daily lives. Okay, so that's the first key information that I want you guys to remember. Second is that we have to consider that most countries in the Africa and in the Asia Pacific region have high numbers of people living in underdeveloped areas, which has the following challenges: poor access to broadband internet, electricity challenges, lack of city-level data, lack of digital and data skills. And because of that, the current smart city approach is failing us. And the thing here is the one that we want to achieve. So from a top-down approach, we want the approach to be more a network management approach, wherein next is the focus on the fragmented technologies. We want it to be more interoperable and open. And of course, currently they don't really consider the procurement issues on the ground. We want the smart city approach in the developing countries to consider the procurement challenges that we have and to discuss it and to address it right on the get-go. And of course, we want a more holistic approach in terms of smart city development, wherein sustainable development and other initiatives are not left out. So to wrap everything up, as I mentioned, there's a lot of opportunities in the Philippines, and perhaps you're coming from a private sector. You can always start an initiative in the Philippines. There's a lot of smart city initiatives that you can start. But the question here in terms of your approach is that how can you really sustain these efforts beyond the pandemic? How can you really sustain these efforts beyond the change of leadership? So as I mentioned, there is much more that can be done. And again, the only way to address this complex, this dynamic issue in terms of smart cities is to shift gears. We can use data, innovation, and collaboration. So with that, I invite you to join the movement on creating a free, open, and smart sustainable future. If you want to learn more about our sustainable approach to digital transformation, and we are always on the look in terms of like-minded partners who wants to support our efforts. So please feel free to contact me. Here's our contact information. So again, I'm Kris from SmartCT. Thanks, Tak.
All right, thank you, Kris. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. Wow, I found a lot of parallels between Philippines and Japan. We are facing almost the same issues. I didn't know much about the Philippines before, but today I had the chance to learn a lot. Thank you very much again. And for the audiences, now it's time to jump in. You guys can send any questions or comments via the chat, so please feel free to do that. And in the meantime, I would like to open some questions to Kris. Once we get the questions from the audiences, we shift our eyes to the audiences, right? So before the deep diving into the more critical questions, I just want to ask you why you named the organization SmartCT. It's unique naming, so please let me know.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Tak. So the question was why it's smart C and T.
Yeah.
So basically, C represents citizens, and T represents technology. So what we really want to achieve in terms of the smart city development is to really have a people-centric approach wherein, technology is being used as a tool to really enhance and to really better the quality of life of the people. So there's this like merge between the citizens and the technology.
I see. I think it's a nice way of sending a message to people, right? When you say smart cities, then people mistake it as, it's only about urban locations only, right? But we are talking about anywhere in the country where, by the use of technology, we can make people happier, right? And
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Actually, it's one of the challenges that we experience in the Philippines. Because in the Philippines, if you say cities refer to like highly urbanized areas, and it doesn't refer to municipalities. So municipalities is a different bracket of what you say, like local government units. So most of the municipalities that we talk to, even if they are highly highly developed municipalities, they feel left out in terms of this smart city term. So they will ask me, can we become smart city for a municipality? So there's this like notion, that smart city is only for cities and not for municipalities.
I see. Yeah. I think we are facing some of the similar issues. The word is not representing what should be, right? And originally, we tend to focus too much on technology too, right? So smart city was about technology. And after looking around the world, we recognize maybe it's a little bit off. People are talking about something else like livability or sustainability or resilience. And then, are we creating smart city and the resilient city separately? The answer is no, right? So it's one integrated concept for the sake of citizens, right? And then your diagram, with the colorful circle with the resilient city, age-friendly city, and so forth. That's a nice message, actually.
Yeah, I really have to put emphasis on that as well, because currently when we talk to other to other organizations, they think that resilient city initiative is different than smart city. But a city cannot be smart if they are not resilient as well. Mm-hmm. And resiliency, you can use technologies to become resilient too. So through the use of technologies, cities can be more resilient as well. So it's really, in terms of digital transformation, as I mentioned earlier, currently it's like technology and digital transformation is embedded in our life as well. So making smart city really inevitable in terms of our future.
I see. And typical challenges in Japan is that certain people are talking about smart cities, right? But people in general are kind of remote from that activities. So making people more aware, promoting awareness of the smart city projects that is going on is a key challenge. It's almost like, we are selling unseen product to people. So people without seeing what the product is, don't know what the smart city would look like. And there's no way that they demand the smart cities. And that's a kind of challenge. The key people in charge of the smart cities in municipalities or corporations or universities, they are almost like a geek on smart cities, passionate about smart city, I would say. But the people in general are not so much enthusiastic about it. Once I was on the taxi of the city famous for smart cities, and I asked the taxi driver, are you aware of this city is known for the smart cities? And the driver says, I didn't know anything about smart cities. That's a typical situation. So what's the situation in the Philippines?
Yeah, it's actually the same. Like if you talk about smart cities, I really don't think that the mass or the average people will really know about it. But if you talk about smart cities in the local government or in the city level or in the government level, they know about it. So it only shows that the current approach really is more a top-down approach rather than like a bottom-up approach. So there's really a gap in terms of such, because the people cannot relate into it. So there's an opportunity and a challenge as well. Like, how can you make sure that the people are really involved in terms of the digital transformation projects that the city implements or that the community implements?
Yeah, in that context, we are also shifting our eyes to bottom-up approach, distributed approach, rather than the top-down approach. When it was early, phase, someone have to start the smart cities, so it's okay that top officials, say this is a mandate for the country. Now let's digitalize the government services, and we need the digital technology to serve for the seniors. That's good. But to get the more consensus around what we do, we need to have a more bottom-up approach, participatory approach. Otherwise, it doesn't really make any sense to people living there. And nowadays in Japan, in addition to the local governments and the corporations, local corporations, we typically invite civic techs, like Code for Japan, to the project. So, DIY, do-it-yourself city, is a kind of buzzword we tend to use nowadays.
That's a good like initiative currently, because in the Philippines, civic tech movement hasn't really started yet. So we really want, as a smart city, as an organization, really want to push for that as well. So we don't have Code for Philippines, so perhaps we can do that. There are several hackathons, but it's not really sustained because it's like, again, it's a top-down approach. So yeah, perhaps you can look into, the DIY city initiatives in Japan, that perhaps we could copy it as well.
Yeah.
And another one that I want to note is that in Smart City, we look into translating, certain, certain documents into the local language. So for it to be more, approachable, and for most of the people to understand it, and for it to be more, relatable to other people as well.
It's true. So even for Japanese citizens, smart city is just English. It's not a local words. So, people, emotionally feel kind of remote from that kind of usage of the words. Open data, AI, everything was direct use of the English, right? So that's another issues we are facing. And, the another thing I liked about was the use of the open data. And I think it's a right approach. We are also taking that approach. So together with the civic tech, open data is the two wheels of these, the engine, I would say. We were triggered to move on to that direction by the Great Eastern Earthquake back in 2011, right? So there's no information readily available. So there's no rescue triggered by the information, right? So the civic tech people moved in and just crafted easy codes to disseminate needed information to those who are motivated to support. And it took 10 years to pandemic to bloom, actually. So 10 years ago, probably civic tech was not that prominent, was an early stage, but today they are the kind of essential player for the smart cities. So sadness happened to be a good driver for the change in Japan.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. In the Philippines, actually, I believe one of the OpenStreetMap community is really active as well in terms of really pushing for, open data in terms of mapping. So that's one. That's, in terms of the civic tech, I guess, that's one that is really active in the Philippines, but into other fields we're in, civic tech organization really helping the local governments. There's still like a huge gap that we need to address in the Philippines currently. Because currently the approach is the local government will just buy, certain applications, or they will just develop, like get elsewhere, get an organization elsewhere to develop their own, and they don't really share. Unlike, here in the US, the digital service, right? The digital service and the civic tech community really work hand in hand with the government to avoid reduplication, to avoid, to really push for sharing as well. So only one application will be developed and different local governments will share it. So hopefully it will happen in the Philippines sooner or later. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And let's also talk about the multi-stakeholder approach. As a result of taking decentralized distributed approach, we invite multiple players to the project, right? The municipalities to corporation, universities, civic organization, whatnot. And I think it's a right approach. But one drawback we discovered in Japan was that, we need an integrator. We need an orchestrator. Otherwise, the project tend to stuck in the middle somewhere. Particularly when we have a bad news, not making good money or something like that. So probably we need to have some kind of an integrator or orchestrator function in the multi-stakeholder approach. And most recently, we were not there yet, but we came to the concept of the architect, smart city architect. Architect is originally from the construction, right? Or the digital architecture. But beyond digital, we started to cover other parts like people, organization, learning, the corporate governance, the regulations. Someone who is sitting in the middle, not necessarily knowledgeable on anything or everything, but broadly knowledgeable, and with the nice communication skill, who can manage all the stakeholders to the same direction. That's the must item we discovered, and we are trying to raise that kind of people right now, raising and doing at the same time. So it's a little tough, but that's the kind of lesson we learned. Launched the program half a year ago, and probably I'm not sure you may have similar issue.
Yeah, is it? May I ask is it? In your experience, is the orchestrator will be a third party, or will it be coming from the government, or will it come from like a civic service community, or any particular?
Yeah, good question. So we asked the city to decide it. So let's say one particular city in Japan was planning to implement the smart cities, right? And then automatically they know who are the key people. That can be city official. That can be a head of the civic tech in the area. That can be outsourced to a consulting company who have been helping the city for a long time, so well-known person. And then the orchestrator doesn't need to be one person as well. Could be a multiple number of people, like 3, at most 5, teaming up, complementing each other to function as one team. So in my case, I'm an architect of one city, and I'm one of the 3. So we are complementing each other. Other cities as well, like 3 is a typical number.
Yeah, I think that's a great, a great solution, because currently, I believe in the Philippines it's being experienced as well. That's why suddenly we cannot really find, like any best practices that has been done elsewhere. we heard that this particular project was existing before, then suddenly we don't know what happened. So I think having an orchestrator and having like an architect can be like a solution in the Philippines. In terms of who will be or what can it be, I believe for the culture of the Philippines, it'll be better for it to be an outsider. I feel like the government, the city government is quite burdened by, like daily tasks already, like administrative tasks and all. Unless they will create a particular position, perhaps like a smart city manager or something that will really be focused on just managing and basically coordinating everything. I think what I see here in the US and in the Europe, other cities in the Europe, is that what they do is they hire, smart city manager, additional officer in the city itself, and they call them smart city manager, wherein their task really is to coordinate everything, to coordinate all the smart city initiatives, not only so basically he's the one or he or she will be the one coordinating between the private sector, the civic tech, and the city government. But yeah, that's a huge, in the Philippines, onto your question, in the Philippines, that's a huge problem as well in terms of sustaining any digital transformation project, to really have this point person or point organization that will really make sure that everything is a part of a whole. Because currently there's a lot of initiatives elsewhere, but it's not really well organized and well coordinated.
Right. And both Japan and the Philippines are not necessarily the fast runner in the smart city field, right? We tend to look at Europe as a fast runner, and then nowadays look at the Middle East as a dramatically changing giant with the financial muscle, right? So which city in the world do you typically look at?
Well, for me, I typically look at Amsterdam. Any particular city in Europe. I believe their approach is really people-centric. They're really good at communicating in terms of their campaign awareness. They're really good in terms of campaign awareness. So, and I really want their approach in terms of gamifying certain what they call this, making certain activities, smart city planning activities fun, so that people can relate to it as well. And in terms of Asia Pacific, what Singapore is something to look into in terms of their policies. In terms of execution, I don't think the Philippines can really jump into it, really. But in terms of their policies and how they do their government technologies and how they develop it. So what Singapore did is I believe they have their pseudo corporate arm, wherein they're the one who's like really developing the government technology systems that they have and such. So that's a good approach. So in terms of policy, Singapore can be like a good front runner as well. How about you?
Yeah, I first of all agree with you on Amsterdam. They are very good at communication, right? So they host art event, and the people attended to learn about the smart city unexpectedly, something like that, right? Fun to learn, something like that. So there are smart people, and making everything like art, something family time type of orientation. Then all parts of smart city communications. They're smart at that, and I'm also looking into Helsinki, Finland, from the well-being standpoint. I still wonder. I haven't demystified why they're so well-being oriented and so achiever of the well-being. But I feel there is a little cultural similarity between Finnish people and the Japanese people. not too much demanding actually. Rather quietly listen to what other people say. So there's a good fit. And from the Asian Pacific, Singapore being one, but Melbourne is another one. Walkable city, beautiful city.
Yeah, good thing you mentioned about the walkable one. So yeah, that's something I'm still looking at, places wherein hopefully the Philippines can emulate in terms of walkable city. But I believe one of the cities in the Philippines can be a good, like best practice in terms of being walkable. If you would like to go to the Philippines, you can visit Iloilo City. They're really good in terms of creating, their city, a walkable city as well, and creating really a bike lane, like a designated bike lane for cyclists to use.
I see. Kris, in Japan, most of them, I would say, smart cities are taking brownfield approach. So cities already existed. So we have to kind of reinvent with the technology to make them smart cities. And we do have very few limited number of smart cities taking greenfield approach due to limited lands, size and kind of type of land, etc. How about in Philippines? What's the ratio between greenfield and brownfield approach?
Well, on paper, in terms of plans, there's a lot of like greenfield approach, but in terms of implementation, it's really hard to do, considering like the one that I showed you earlier, the gray area is really taking over in terms of the country. I hope they would be a lot more, like perhaps like urban farming or something can be done, because currently if you will push for smart cities especially in the highly urbanized areas, there's very limited green areas available for us. So urban farming is something to look into. But that's why in our organization, we're also pushing for smart city development on the countryside. So, because if you look on the countryside, those rural areas can become a smart, city in a green approach. So that's something to look into. But hardly currently I cannot think of any particular initiatives outside wherein they're really pushing for. And there's a lot of push, but in terms of implementation, I cannot really find something.
Maybe once started, greenfield approach goes faster. And brownfield approach takes a lot of time because you have to first clean up what already existed, right? Maybe some adjustments, some compromise, the regulatory reform. But looking at the smart city around the world, for example, Busan and Sejong in Korea, they're taking greenfield approach, and that's the national project. So money and talent poured into that project, where there's nothing. You can start from scratch. That's a smart way, probably.
Yeah. I guess. Well, there's one in the Philippines that they tried to in Metro Manila, but I don't know what happened. It was put on halt. They tried to reclaim a particular it's a reclamation project, but there's a lot of people who are against it, and I don't think it pushed through. And there's another one that they're planning again somewhere on the countryside. But there's a lot of people against it and organization against it as well. So most of this, zero to something approach of smart city is like reclamation projects, which has a lot of issues and challenges on the side. So currently, the smart city projects in the Philippines are mostly on the existing ones, which are really hard, really hard, as you mentioned, because you have to deal with the existing systems first the existing systems that they have, the existing technologies that they have, the existing problems that they have in terms of the slum areas, the land use and such. And of course, there's existing, political system that they have in the area. So it's really hard currently to have like that approach as well.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So let's shift our eyes to the audience comments. The first one is from Kono-san. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation, which has enabled us to understand the current situation of smart city movements in the Philippines. Question number 1. You mentioned 11 smartness dimensions in your slide on assessment. I wonder if you could list the 11 dimensions.
Sorry about that. So in terms of the 11 dimensions, first would be, I guess, the LGU strategy or the city strategy. So that's where the vision and mission comes. Then second would be the localizing, of course, of the sustainable development goals. That's one of that we included. That's not part of any other, smart city assessment. So that's the second one. The third one is the stakeholder engagement and communications. So how do you really, or a particular city, how do they engage and how do they communicate the smart city initiatives to other stakeholders? As you mentioned earlier, the multi-stakeholder approach. The fourth one is the operating model and service delivery. So what's the model that being used? Is it, in terms, so that's where the procurement is included and such. And fifth is the asset management. How are the assets managed and who really handles the particular systems and such. So it's being assessed as well by our smart LGU assessment. Next is the six is the data strategy. So of course, as I mentioned earlier, data really fuels the innovation in terms of the city. So data strategy is really important. Seventh is related to the data strategy. Seventh is the access to data. So currently, as I've mentioned, FOI, the freedom of information, you can request the data from the government, but open data is better if the data is there and you don't have to request. So the access to data is number 7. And of course, in that particular, the access of data, you have to note as well, is it machine readable? Because it's important in terms of digital transformation. So number 8 would be the ICT plan. Of course, the systems should be, well coordinated, and so it will be, a whole system approach. And 9 would be the standards. So what are the standards used? Because it includes the data standards, it includes the tech standards, and currently there's a lot of standards in terms of smart city. Then of course, so number 9 is the innovation ecosystem. So of course, and a smart city is an innovative city. So we have to assess how if that particular if your smart city initiatives creates an innovative ecosystem as well. Are there any startups that has been coming up and such? And of course, the performance management. Performance management is the monitoring and evaluation of the project. So how does your particular city monitor and evaluate the success or the misgivings of the smart city initiatives that we have? So those are the 11 smartness dimension that we include in our assessment. So I guess that's it for the first question, right?
Very comprehensive. Maybe you can someday issue a textbook for smart city practitioners. Very comprehensive and very understandable.
Thank you.
Yeah. Question number 2. I wonder if you could tell us a couple of examples of procurement issues which are kind of obstacles of the current smart city development.
Yeah, I guess the first thing that entered my mind is the cloud services. In the Philippines, we're still having a hard time. The cities are still having a hard time in terms of their procurement of cloud services. Why? Because the approach of the the funding of the cities in the Philippines, the budgeting, it's like planned budgeting for 1 year. And in cloud services, you can't really really project how many data sets that you will need and how many cloud storage that you would need. So that's one of the that's the first thing. That's the first thing that really entered my mind in terms of procurement. Another thing, so that's cloud services. The another thing is like any particular technology as a service. So kind of like the cloud services, that problem, as I mentioned, the procurement in terms of the cities, the budgeting is a 1 year thing. So if it's a service, as a service, you really need to have like a predicted, what they call this, package already to say that, okay, we will get your service and it will be included in the budgeting as well. So those are the ones that I have currently in mind.
Okay, thank you very much. Move on to the next one from Hideyuki Okamoto-san. Which do you see more opportunities between already developed city like Manila or undeveloped city? In my opinion, smart city concept will improve level of overall public services in undeveloped city in small island. Appreciate if you have any good example.
Yeah, so so the question is if I see more opportunities in Manila, which is a developed one, or the underdeveloped cities. As I mentioned, as I've showed earlier in my presentation, we really believe that there's a lot of potential and opportunities in the countryside. Metro Manila is quite saturated already. Metro Manila, if you're a private company, has a lot of resources. So if you see, there's a lot of smart city initiatives in Metro Manila because Metro Manila has a lot of resources to give to spend. But in terms of opportunities, if you're looking at sustaining your smart city projects, if you're looking at really involving the people on the ground and really embedding the smart city development on the ground, there's more opportunities in the underdeveloped city and in the countryside, really. First, why? Why did I say that? First, because from my experience, the leaders are more, they understand the city better. It's not so big that they don't really understand. They understand the city better. They understand the needs of the people better. Second, it's easy to orchestrate. If we are talking about orchestration, there's not much of bureaucracy to deal with. So the underdeveloped cities and the cities, the areas on the countrysides are more nimble in terms of their approach. So any particular examples? Currently, our pilot project is Arteche Municipality. So it's a small municipality in city. There's what we experience here is that the buy-in of the mayor is there. So it's really solidifying the smart city efforts that we do. That's a really big what they call this. It's really important for a smart city initiative to have the buy-in of the leader and to have a champion in your particular city. So I guess in my opinion, smart city concept will improve. Yes, it will, and also if you're gonna apply the smart city development in underdeveloped areas, I agree with the question that in terms of success factor or success, what they call this, like key performance indexes, it's easy to see. Like, okay, for example, we partnered with Arteche. One of our key performance indices is that at least train higher level of data literate individuals in the city. So so you have a specific number to have already. Unlike with other municipalities there's a bunch of initiatives that I'm not saying that you will compete with, but there's a lot of initiatives that you really cannot say 100% that your particular project is the reason that this particular key performance really improve or not. So I hope I answered that particular question.
Thank you very much. I came up with another question. Nowadays, I'm talking to the smart city leaders around the world, and many of them are female now. Not just only the smart cities, but political leaders, national leaders. And when it comes to the decentralized, distributed, implementation of the society, I think a female has more, power to resonate to people. I feel that, if you were to centralize everything and the power-based top-down approach, just like army, maybe man is more suitable historically. But today, rather than power, more, compassion or, well-being, then why shouldn't we have more female leaders in the construction of smart cities? A natural inclination, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Of course, I agree with you on that. Of course, I agree with you on that. Because currently, if you look at the leaders as well, like perhaps we're looking for a different, a different touch or a different approach than the usual one. Rather than a strict, we want more flexible. I don't know if it's just the culture as well, but in the Philippines, the culture is that, in the Philippines, the female is more like nurturing. They are seen as more nurturing. The mothers are more, not really disciplinarian, but, really in terms of guidance, you will look for your mother as well. So I agree with you that hopefully there will be more leaders, like female leaders in smart city community as well. And we hope that we will be able to, to stand behind the belief that, the female leaders are more nurturing and such.
Yep. All right, thank you. And let's move on to next one, Kudo-san. Thank you for your great presentation. You mentioned about urbanization is rapidly happening in the Philippines. Japan faced the same issue in the past. I think we are facing it now too. Like, the crowded train to commute, for example. From your point of view, how can Japan contribute to the social agenda of urbanization in the Philippines? Is there anything we can do?
A lot. As I mentioned earlier, in my experience working with the Japan organizations, I really admire how systematic and how data-driven their approach are. So we hope, in terms of the social agenda of urbanization, the Japan can contribute to us in terms of showing us how the way in terms of being data-driven, in terms of the system's approach in terms of doing things, and really paying attention to details as well, and really making sure that everything is documented. Because currently in the Philippines, if you look at the projects, the documentation, it's really hard to get. The documentation is really hard to get. The data is really hard to get. The approach is, all over the place. So hopefully, in terms of those particular approach, the Japan can help us.
Thank you very much. You talked about Cebu as one of the cases, right? And the city of Yokohama has some contribution to city of Cebu. And hopefully we can promote more city-to-city collaboration through our communication, right, Kris?
Yes, that's true. Yeah, I believe they are the one who's like helped the Cebu in terms of their bus rapid transit as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Next one, Kono-san again, Kris. New Clark City might be a greenfield approach. And are there any differences in approaches to smart cities in comparison with other smart cities?
Yeah, you're correct. New Clark City is a greenfield approach. So as I mentioned earlier, well, I believe New Clark City is the only one who's like not a reclaimed project. That's a greenfield approach. Other than that, most of the green, field approach on smart cities in the Philippines are more on the reclamation side. So the question here is, are there any differences in terms of approach? As I mentioned earlier, yeah. So greenfield approach, New Clark City, and other reclamation sites, and of course, but what I see here is that they're more on the real estate projects rather than really smart city projects, the reclamation like greenfield approach in terms of the smart cities. So that's something to look into as well. Like perhaps there will come a time that we will differentiate the real estate smart cities into the smart city we're in, like a more holistic smart city really.
I see. All right. So, Kris, I think we got the last person. That's from Elson Piano Jr. Is it possible for local government units Smart City Initiative to be under PPP to fast track ICT infrastructure? Any downside?
PPP, well, it's always possible to, because LGU has a corporate power, so it's always possible to have a smart city initiative under PPP or public-private partnership to fast track the ICT infrastructure. So in terms of the downside, there's a huge downside there. I always believe that our approach in terms of the PPP, the private-private partnership, is not sustainable if we don't really involve the people. So hopefully, this particular initiative will be for peace, like people, private, and public partnership, rather than public and just private partnership, and expect that people will just use the Smart City Initiative or will just come and support the Smart City Initiative that the public and the private sector has. So that's the answer for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. 4 Ps, right? Yeah.
Yeah, 4 Ps should be the way to go. People, private, and public sector, right on the get-go, and not on the latter part of any initiative.
Yep. All right. And continue with the same person. Does devolution hinders national government agency like DICT to spearhead Smart City Initiative? DICT is the ideal agency to spearhead the Smart City Initiative to have some language softwares used in all cities and municipalities. This pretty much sounds like a local question.
Yeah, so DICT, Department of Information and Communication Technology, is currently the one. It's a newly formed organization which is heading the ICT, ICT drives or ICT initiatives in the government. So the question here is, does the devolution hinders the national government agency like DICT to spearhead the Smart City Initiative? I don't think so. I don't think that the devolution will hinder the DICT to spearhead a Smart City Initiative. What I believe that DICT should do is to provide guidance and not really develop a software and not really spoon-fed the cities and municipalities. The national government doesn't have to centralize everything. What the DICT should do is to create a guidance in terms of the standards so that the cities know which standards to follow. Create like a regulation in terms of procurement, in terms of how the cities will procure services from the tech vendors, and other guidance in terms of the data standards, the open data policies and such. So the DICT can do that without really centralizing everything, the development of the software. Because I believe that the city should be capacitated in terms of developing their own technologies and developing their own systems. The DICT cannot handle everything. The cities, we have how many cities? 145 cities. Then we have 1,500 municipalities. One national agency cannot handle the development of everything. The national government is there to guide the cities, but the CT should be capacitated and be well developed as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Kris, we cleared all the questions. Thank you very much. Yeah, and yeah, again, thank you for your great presentation. And we found a lot of parallels between Philippines and Japan. And I think that indicates we have a room for collaboration going forward as well. And thank you for answering all the questions in detail. Very kind answers. Thank you very much. And hopefully we can keep discussing our future collaboration going forward. Right. Thank you very much.
Yes, of course. Thank you for facilitating this, and thank you for organizing this. I really believe that the Philippines and Japan has been in a relationship, like a fruitful relationship for a while. So it is only what we call this. The next step would be collaboration in terms of digital transformation and smart cities, really. So yeah, I really look forward to work with SCI and really push for a more people-centric approach, a PPPP approach, a 4PP approach in terms of smart cities, and hopefully we can learn from each other. I believe that our culture are really embedded with each other. Our history is embedded with each other. So there's a lot of room to improve together and to learn together.
Okay, thank you very much, Kris. All right, this concludes our webinar today. And now I'll hand it over to Kuto-san.
Yes, just a minute, please. So first of all, thank you very much, Kris, for your excellent and wonderful presentation. And I think audience today learned a lot from you, and we sincerely appreciated your effort today. And for the audiences who are staying now, I'd just like to quickly go over our introduction of Smart City Institute Japan. Oh, yes. So thanks for viewing today, and you will receive a questionnaires after this event. So we would appreciate if you could answer them. And also the programs of the webinars will be available on our Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn, those SNSs. And also, they are also posted on the SCI-Japan's website. And past videos, including today, will be posted on Smart City Institute Japan's YouTube channel. So stay tuned. And programs today is Monday. So Tuesday, tomorrow, we will have another Global Perspectives English version. Parallels between Enterprise DX and Smart Cities. We welcome the guest from SAP Labs Japan. And also next week, Monday, Tuesday, we will have two Global Perspectives English only series. Monday, we will have Spain, Factual Consulting, talks about a European project of the smart cities. And Tuesday, we have a guest from Korea, WeGo. We have a strong relationship with WeGo as a Smart City Institute Japan, and they appeared last year, and they are appearing again. And also, in the middle of this August, we will have a guest from Estonia. Our Smart City Institute Japan established 2 years ago, and our membership is growing, and now it's 430. And also our global partnership organizations are increasing, and here we have SmartCT. Okay, this is the end of the presentation, and thank you for watching the webinar today, and we hope to see you tomorrow as well. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye now.
Thank you.